Essentially, two things happen or take place or are discussed in Parshat Shmini. The first extended one is a narrative of the inauguration of the first generation of priests to work in the Mishkan. And the whole setup and them getting dressed in certain uniforms, offering an inaugural korban sacrifice, and then two of Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, bringing what the Torah calls an Eish Zara, a strange fire, into the Mishkan, and God zapping them on the spot. The second thing that the Parsha is about is telling you that you cannot eat a camel, essentially. It's the laws of kashrut, which mammals, which fowl, which things that swim in the ocean and hop on land you can and cannot eat. On some level, we don't know why a parsha begins when it begins and ends when it ends. It's in that category of halacha Moshe Sinai. Moses got it that way at Sinai. There's no cliff notes. And it could be that some of the edges of the parasha might be either arbitrary or only available to the divine knowledge. But it's a worthy question what the connection is between the inauguration of the priests and the foul that Nadav and Avihu committed that cost them their lives on the one hand, and which crickets and grasshoppers you can and cannot eat on the other hand. Our best guess as to what the meaning of the laws of kashrut are, and it's just a guess, we don't know. The Torah does not tell us why here. Anything you think about as a why for kashrut is ex post facto. Our best guess has to deal with a God of distinctions and categories and boundaries. I was discussing this with a bar mitzvah student this week who's going to be writing about this potentially at a drash of his in a couple of weeks. If you think about the ways in which Jews are enjoined from eating certain foods, think about it through the prism of God's categories, and some sensibility rises. Dead flesh is all about the end of life and death. Milk is the elixir of life that gives vitality, particularly to mammal babies. Death is over here, life is over there. They just can't go into each other's realm. Sort of a parallel to Tuma and Tahara. That might be the early underpinning, the divine or anthropological understanding as to why Jews, for the most part, take the flesh of animals over there, the milk of animals over there, and we don't combine them together. And when it comes to the types of animals we can eat, not mixtures, again, the Torah doesn't tell us why. And in some of the animals we have criteria, and in some of the animals we have lists. And for the most part, it seems to be that the Torah is interested in giving us permission only to eat those animals that stay within their lane, that stay within their categories. The types of things that you can eat that live in the water are fishes that are very fishy, not huge red bugs that happen to live in the ocean and apparently taste good with butter sauce. Fishy fishes are fish. Other things that are in the water are intruding upon the very categories that God set up at Breshit. Water here, land there. Even when it comes to all the insects that you enjoy eating at your Shabbat table. By the way, thank you, Natalie, for serving insects at the next year's Shabbat lunch. I think it was really Parsha appropriate to have all the edible locusts available on all the tables. For the most part, it seems that insects that are based on the ground, as opposed to ones that fly and hop around and are trying to be animals that are in the air, that is our distinction between edible and inedible. It's not a perfect analysis, but it's pretty good. And it links the end of Parshat Shmini and all of our food restrictions that are not Pesach-based to the beginning of the Torah and God's introducing God's self to us as a God who makes distinctions and divisions and likes categories the way they once were, without too much mixing. That is not just a frame for kashrut. It can be a helpful frame for an enormous amount of our pattern and obligation of observance. A few hours from now, those of you who come back for Mincha and Mariv are going to stand together to do a ritual called Havdalah. Havdalah means to make a distinction. In that ceremony, we're making a distinction between Shabbat and the rest of the week. We're also making a distinction between the Jewish people and those who observe different rules. And we're using the very verb that the Torah used to describe what God did in the first chapter of Breshit. We are about recognizing the liminality of categories in time, in species, and saying this over here, that over there. The first bracha that a Jew is supposed to say in the morning after the Modeh, the first time you invoke God's name in the morning, is to say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu Mecholam, Asher natan lasechvi vina, who gave the rooster the understanding, lehavchin, to make a distinction, ben yom u'ben laila, between day and night. We pray on the edges. We pray when night yields to day, and we pray again at night when day turns into night. We are a people whose gustatory obligations and whose ritual observance have to do with making sure that things are ordered and stay where they're supposed to be. And we know that prayer operates in a similar realm. We are in the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, and though we didn't speak that much about korbanot in today's parsha, it's the very ordered structure of korbanot, of sacrifices, that led, once the temple was destroyed, to a worship service, a prayer service, a davening, where you have to stand in certain situations, bow in certain situations, say this page before that page. Everything is structured and ordered, and Gabaim get very anxious when people come to the bima and don't know exactly what thing is supposed to be done in what way. Everything in our tradition is as it should be. And we know that beyond Judaism, this makes a lot of sense as well. Children need rules to feel safe, even if they think they would wish to live without such rules. Societies need laws to be ordered, even though it seems like a free and liberating thing to live with no restrictions. How many of you know the name Christopher McCandless? Christopher McCandless is the young gentleman who graduated from Emory University, turned down an opportunity to use a trust fund from his parents, and went walking into the wild. And he was written about in the wonderful book by John Krakauer called Into the Wild, and eventually died tragically alone near the minibus that he had found and created a home around somewhere in the Alaskan wilderness. The last few pages of his diary, which serve as an anchor to Krakauer's book, are filled with wisdom and pathos, because he realizes that he is dying from some disease that he assumes is because all of his extremely careful categorization of which plants and shrubs and mushrooms were edible and which were dangerous and poisonous, on the other hand, got mixed up. And he believes he ate some, he calls potato seeds, that were of the wrong taxonomy. And just a slight change in what the seeds looked like would have been seeds that would have nourished him and kept him alive, and seeds which actually ultimately attacked his body, not giving him even enough strength to go and find help. And that is how he died. And he connects at the end of his life to Thoreau's majesty of understanding that the significance of the human being is to be able to use our minds to know what is what and to make distinction between fine categories. I want to say that everything I have just said in the first 8 or 12 minutes of this sermon, we have learned too well. We, particularly in modern 20th, 21st century, non-absolutist, non-extremist, non-orthodox Judaism, have learned some of this regimen too well, particularly in the academy and particularly with prayer. I believe that we are erring on the side of order and structure and predictability, leaning too much into the God of categories and distinctions, and not enough into release and abandon and the reach for transcendence. I'm going to tell you a story that I've told in different contexts. You've heard it before. I apologize. When I was in rabbinical school, we had obligations to do rotations in different fields that you might serve in as a rabbi. And I remember when I did my pulpit rotation, I was so excited to get it out of the way because I knew I wasn't going to be a pulpit rabbi, so I could just check that off. Who would want to do that? And I did a rotation in chaplaincy, and my residency, for lack of a better word, was in Beth Israel Hospital in the lower near the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And basically, we were told by our chaplain mentor to go in and to find rooms where people are sick and offer to pray with them. And what I figured was that my most meaningful experiences would be to find the Jews in the hospital, go in and sing the Shema and Moda Ani and say Mishaberach, and we'd have an amazing experience. Jews are so boring in the hospital. They didn't want to pray with me. The notion of a semi-spontaneous prayer did not speak to them. I said a Mishaberach, I held their hand, we had some sweet moments, but nothing happened in that room. You know who's fun to visit in hospitals? Southern Baptists. I can still picture the faces of some of the people, particularly the women whom I visited in that hospital, who when they found that a man of God was coming into their room to pray with them, boy, did we daven. We didn't need a siddur. I didn't need a single text. I just needed to hold this person's hand and open up my mouth and open up our heart and articulate the prayer to God, the complaint, the wish, the happiness, the hope that was present, and we had an unbelievable spiritual experience. How often does that happen in this room? I want to read to you a quote about prayer in the American condition. Our services are conducted with pomp and precision. The rendition of the liturgy is smooth. Everything is present. Decorum, voice, ceremony. But one thing is missing. Life. One knows in advance what will ensue. There will be no surprise, no adventure of the soul. There'll be no sudden burst of devotion. Nothing is going to happen to the soul. Nothing unpredictable must happen to the person who prays, end quote. Those words were written by Abraham Joshua Hessel and delivered as a sermon, a castigating sermon to the rabbinical assembly, to the gathering of conservative rabbis in the United States in 1953. Heschel diagnosed the illness even back then. And I'm not sure we have anything close to the right prescription for the healing. Don't we at least want the chance that when we come into this space, we're going to transcend it? That when we come to pray, the prayer is going to bring us somewhere, even for a minute. We're in this period of the Omer, the 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot. And for those of you who sometimes meditate with me, you know that my favorite take on the Omer is the overlay that the Kabbalists placed onto the rabbinic notion of counting up to Revelation at Sinai and taking the 7x7 grid, each of the 7 days of the 7 weeks, as representing an aspect of God's emanation, of the Sfirot, of the Kabbalah, and then a sub-emanation, because each day of that week is a subset of it. We are in the 2nd week of the Omer. The 2nd week of the Omer is the week of Gvura. Gvura in standard Hebrew means might or strength. In Kabbalistic Hebrew, Gvura means discipline, restraint, because one of the ways our tradition thinks about how we use our strength the most, we become heroic when we control our urges. There is a lot of gvura in this community and a lot of gvura in this room. We restrain ourselves really well. Kol hakavod. But today is the 12th day of the Omer, which means it's the 5th day of the 7th week, which means we are in the subcategory of Yesod Shebagvura. Yesod in standard Hebrew means foundation. In the Kabbalah, Yesod means love. Yesod means bonding. Yesod means ecstasy. On this day of the Omer, we're supposed to be, yes, holding ourselves to a certain standard of holdback so we don't eat anything that we want to eat. And we don't do anything we want to do. There's gvura. But on this day, we're supposed to be ensuring that our gvura is filtered through and experienced through yesod. Love, a pushing past certain boundaries, a welcoming and a beckoning of the unexpected, and at least the possibility of being in a different realm, if even for a moment. Which brings me back to Nadav and Avihu and the potential connection between the first and second parts of Shmini. It's almost as if the second part of the Shmini, all these restrictions on what you should eat as you live a life of holiness, was a reaction, maybe an overreaction, to a lust for life and a willingness to be close to God that Nadav and Avihu exemplified, and maybe they went a little too far. But maybe they didn't go that much too far. Maybe their interest in introducing into the pomp and structure and circumstance and predictability of that ritual for a little spontaneity was something the Torah should not have outright vilified, but actually helped the descendants of Nadav and Avihu express in appropriate ways. Their aish, their fire may have been a little too zara, a little too strange. But ours is not enough. They may have crossed too many boundaries too quickly, too close in to God's sanctified realm. And we are probably still too far away. So the next time you have an opportunity to stand in prayer, try to do it maybe a little bit less like your normal praying, structured, enclosed self. And maybe a little bit more like Nadav and Avihu. You won't be struck down dead. And mincha's at 6:45.